Welcome to the Hypervoice. I'm your host, Stephen Morioka, and I am joined by Alex Underhill.
Alola there, Stephen.
Alola. And we are also joined by Leonard Craft III.
Hello. I don't have a fancy introduction, sorry.
I mean, I use Alola every single week. I said Alola there this time to spice it up, but it's, you gotta say just what comes to mind right off the top of your head, so yeah, no worries.
Yeah, we're only gonna be in Sun and Moon for so long, so we gotta use it while we're here. We're gonna switch games eventually.
Plus, I really like it. It's a fun, saying Alola, just as a hello.
I like the in-game spreading of the hands when they do it too, a lot of the times.
Yeah, I like that as well.
They just wave the hands. But anyway, this is a show all about Pokemon's Video Game Championship Series, VGC for short, and today we have brought on Leonard for a very specific topic, talking about EV spreads and efficiency and optimization and things like that. We're going to talk about the attack survival calculator, correct?
Yep, newly hosted on Trainer Tower.
Mm-hmm.
We also have Trainer Tower stats covering the top Pokemon from March and April and their cut percentage from various teams and tournaments from those months. And then we have questions to end the show with. So let's start with EVs and EVs as an effort values, not EV the Pokemon.
Well, you say that, but Leonard's got experience with both, actually.
Yeah, I actually brought EV to the most recent regional. So what I was planning on doing was getting on stream and then making some sort of joke about EV training. And I got the wrong EV training going in. But that didn't get to happen because I went X3. So pro tip, don't bring EV to regionals unless you're Geo.
I mean, you were up there, though. I remember, you played against Grant, and I think Grant beat you, right?
Mm-hmm. Grant was my first loss of the day.
Yeah, and I, was, it was tough to see two people that I'm friends with playing each other, but I was, secretly well, as long as I don't have to play Eevee, I don't think I was ready for Eevee.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who weren't ready for Eevee that day, but there were some who were, and that's why I went X3.
Yeah, it can be a great call sometimes, but it's a very dangerous one.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense. It kind of makes sense why you also weren't really streamed that tournament, because even though you had the an Eevee team, you had Geo there as well. So I feel like if they're going to pick an Eevee player, they're going to go with Geo because he has the history with that team.
Yes. I was actually very scared of playing Geo on stream because the Eevee Nair is awful. I had one plan, and if that didn't work, then I was just going to probably get bodied. So I was really happy that we didn't have to play each other. The mirror is very silly. But yeah, the EVs that we're going to be talking about today are the numbers, not the cute little furry Pokemon.
Yeah, and a very exciting topic indeed. I'm sure a lot of people can learn from this, me myself included. There are things I still end up learning related to EVs and, I guess, effort values is the long term for it. And there's some things that I've learned this year, and it's just really cool how important they are for Pokemon. It's one of the things that makes our game really unique, and how much the ability you have to tweak so much in your team. And I guess the biggest one, although we'll probably get into that later, is just speed. There's so much going on with that stat in general, and so I think it's really cool that we're going to be able to talk about different kinds of topics related to EVs.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that the basic point to start when discussing EVs is thinking about what they actually are in game. If you're very new to this, then you probably are hearing these EVs and thinking, I have no idea what this is. If you've heard of this podcast, you probably do know what they are, however. You probably have some experience playing on Showdown, and you see that little option there at the end when you have your stats. You see the option. It gives you some sort of default, usually. That'll give you 252 of something in one stat. The official Pokemon Company calls them, or rather TPCI calls them base stats, because that's what they're officially referred to in game. But ever since Generation 3, when the proper EV system had been put in place, we just usually go with the fan name, and it's stuck ever since. So EVs are very technical. The reason EV spread creation is important is because stats are important. The reason why certain Pokemon, for example, the Tapus, or maybe Pokemon like Porygon 2, or Metagross, or any other strong Pokemon, are so good is partly because of their combination of abilities, moves, and
Typing.
but also because of how strong their inherent stats are. So we can use our EVs to invest in these stats to make them stronger. You can make your Pokemon faster, more powerful, or bulkier, and all of those have certain applications. For example, a Tapu Lele can never outspeed a Garchomp unless it's holding a Choice Scarf.
That is a max speed invested Garchomp.
Yes, correct.
Right.
So if you are, for example, wanting to survive, say, the Tectonic Rage from Garchomp, because you could not outspeed this Garchomp to knock it out in one hit with a Moonblast prior to, then you might have to do some digging in order to figure out how exactly you could make it so your Tapu Lele can survive a Tectonic Rage. In fact,
would you have to dig to the core of the earth?
You might have to dig even further than that. I'm pretty sure you actually need an Intimidate for it to be a very reasonable spread. With EVs, you've got some limitations. You can only have 508 of them total, and you can only invest 252 in each stat. Now, these are, again, basic properties of EVs, but I think they're important to think about when going in, because in order to distribute your EVs, most players just simply go with investing in two stats. They'll invest in their HP and their offensive stat, or they'll invest in their offensive stat and their speed. So you either try to be bulky and powerful, or powerful and speedy. That tends to be the way trainers will EV their Pokemon. This is usually a decent approach, and it's one that I think is very viable for a lot of Pokemon. For example, Araquanid is a good example of a Pokemon that I think should be running something like max HP, max defense. Or sorry, max attack. Don't run max defense.
Okay.
I was like, yeah, where are you going?
It's like, what kind of plans do you have with this?
No, please don't do that. That's not a good idea. But I think that's important because Araquanid is already, I think, kind of weak without its liquidation, so you need to power that up using its EVs a little bit.
Yeah, it's also interesting, like 252 spreads. Some people try to, like, once they have a bit of experience with EVs, they try to avoid them because they're like, oh, that's too basic. But sometimes that's all you really need. Sometimes, like you mentioned, you need a Pokemon to just be speedy and hit as hard as possible. I had a number of very simple, very basic 252 spreads on my regionals team, or teams that are spreads that I had used on other teams. And so you don't always have to be super creative with them, but when you're really like trying to optimize a team and make it the best it can be, that's when you want to start critiquing and looking for the specific damage calcs that you want to like live and get in the KOs you want to take.
Definitely agree with that, especially Pokemon like I think you brought up one good example from your regionals team is Tapu Koko, where running max speed is actually incredibly important, because the Tapu Koko mirror is something that you might be able to get chip damage on the opponent's Tapu Koko, and then being able to attack first with Dazzling Gleam has a lot of value. I think there's also reasons to run maybe Modest Koko in certain situations, but I think Timid Koko is definitely a good call, and something that you shouldn't have to think too hard about when using. The reason usually you want to create more custom EV spreads to deviate from 252 is when you have a Pokemon that has a lot of bulk on it. A really good example that I can think of this is Snorlax. So Snorlax is a Pokemon that uses either like Belly Drum or Curse. Those are two moves that you see commonly on Snorlax to boost its attacking power. You don't necessarily need to invest all your 252 EVs into attack if you want to hit the necessary, say, 2-hit KOs or 3-hit KOs you want to hit with your attacks. For example, I know that some players, if I remember right, some of them are comfortable with knocking out Tapu Koko after one round of Life Orb recoil. Some players opt to run a lot less than that. I know, for example, on my Snorlax, I usually invest just enough to get the 2-hit knockout on Araquanid. Some players run even less than that, because their logic is, if I can get up my Curses or my Belly Drums, that it doesn't really matter how much attack I have, because I'm going to get all this attack anyway. So I'd rather have my EVs invested in defenses. That way I can tank hits better. This is going to be especially important for Snorlax in endgames, where you need to be recycling a lot on a curse set, and be able to heal up with your 50% berry.
Yeah, that's why EV spreads are definitely like very tailored to the team. You're not always gonna be able to just copy and paste an EV spread from one team to another, especially if you are using Pokemon for different sets like Belly, Germ, or Curse. They do very different things. Whereas if your Snorlax is getting up to +6 in one turn, you might not need so much attack because you are getting so much offense. But if your Snorlax needs to pick up KOs at +1 or +2, then you might need to invest a little bit more into attack if that's your game plan. So if you're planning on doing things in different ways, you want to look into what are the goals of the EV spread and how is it going to be playing exactly on this team.
Exactly. Additionally, I think playing with your EV spread in the context of a metagame is very important. For example, Snorlax is a lot more popular than it was at the start of the season. I think that considering Snorlax when EVing your Pokemon has a lot more value now than it would have back then. In a similar way, Tapu Bulu is now nowhere near as popular as it was back then. EVing your Pokemon to survive a Wood Hammer might not, as a result, have as much value. So I think that, like you said, EVing in the context of a team and in the context of a metagame is what makes a spread especially effective. There are definitely traits that you can take from, like ideas that you can take from different spreads to carry on to a second spread. However, I do think what you're saying is incredibly important. EV spreads should be tailored to an individual's team. And the way you find those out, because it's usually very easy to just take another person's spread or take a spread from the Trainer Tower archive or from a popular report and just use that spread. And in fact, I usually suggest doing that to start off with, so you get a feel for the spread maybe. Maybe if you like it, you can just tweak it a little bit, and then you don't have to do all that much work. You don't have to start from scratch. But generally speaking, I think that learning how to create your own spreads from scratch is a useful skill, because these top players that you're getting these spreads from in the first place had to come up with them somehow.
Yeah, and understanding that level of thinking will help you understand, how to build teams on your own and spreads specifically on your own. All these things that you've mentioned, I was victim to for my regionals team, whether it was stealing a spread from a popular report. That's what I ended up doing with my Arcanine. I just looked on Trainer Tower and took Ricardo's because I was like, I just want an Arcanine and I want to play some games now. And then same thing with the Assault Vest one was from Trainer Tower. Celesteela was just from a friend, and then the Tapu Koko and Togedemaru was just 252 spreads. So I've been a victim of a lot of these things, and I could definitely use a bit more EV optimization.
Yeah, I think the greatest thing in terms of, borrowing EV spreads, there's not really a copyright on borrowing teams or EV spreads for that matter. But, usually I like seeing when people acknowledge this used to be so-and-so person's EV spread, and I use it on this team. And I also like the fact how borrowing definitely something very useful to do. I just want a good EV spread to use this Pokemon, and I don't necessarily want to go 252. You can kind of read in reports why they're using certain spreads they do, their custom EV spreads. And once you see how that spread works on certain teams or even on an individual Pokemon, you can develop skills on your own. Once you develop these skills, you'll be able to start building your own teams, building your own spreads, and you can start ending up having that unique either spread or Pokemon on a team that takes you farther into a tournament.
I think it's also really important to learn from articles where, you learn the big benchmarks. A lot in this metagame, we see powerful Z moves like Garchomp's Tectonic Rage or Tapu Lele's Psychium Z, or maybe you wanted one of your Tapus to live a Poison Jab from Muck. And so, and I guess another big one would be like Flare Blitz from Arcanine. But, these are just all popular benchmarks that you want to be able to survive. And these are moves that you're going to see a lot. And you will learn what these are if you're not able to figure it out yourself and get a starting point just from playing it, like on the ladder in VGC, looking at articles and then looking at the damage calcs that they post with their EV spreads and such. You can get an idea of what to look for in your own. If you're running a fairy type, then maybe you want to live a Poison Jab from Muck or something like that. These are just benchmarks. So I think benchmarks are something that you can definitely learn from reading a report, and that's an important thing to know.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. One example that I can think of that's especially relevant on Arcanine right now, in regards to benchmarks, is Flare Blitz plus Extreme Speed knocking out Tapu Koko. I think that's a very, very common benchmark right now. I don't know how good it is, but I do think it's very common. I think you need 92 EVs and the boosting nature. It's either 92 or 100. One of them is very close. So keeping that in mind, is very good as not only a starting point for your EV spreads. For example, even on like when I was testing with my Tapu Lele team, a Tapu Lele Drifblim team, I had ran 92 attack EVs and an adamant nature on my Arcanine, despite Tapu Lele's psychic terrain blocking my own extreme speed for my Arcanine.
Cool.
So again, this is just an example of things that you can do to test. Another thing that I want to mention with EV spreads is comfortability. I think that's very important. If you are...
definitely. Big one.
Yeah. This one I can speak from personal experience for. Last year in VGC 16, I used a Mega Salamence that would knock out a posing Primal Groudon in 3 hits with Hyper Voice that were trained to survive posing timid Primal Groudon's Earth Power. Saying that out loud all at once makes it sound kind of complicated, but it actually was very useful in a multitude of different situations. That Mega Salamence spread that I ran, I used it on a dual primals team. I used it on my nationals team. I used it on my worlds team. The familiarity that I had with that spread was extremely important. For example, I knew my probabilities for a Hyper Voice plus a Geomancy boosted Moonblast from Xerneas to knock out a Primal Groudon from various amounts of bulk. I knew, again, a multitude of different things with just my Salamence, and because I was so experienced with it. So I think that is something that is important. We were just talking about how EV spreads can be tailored to an individual team, but EV spreads can also be tailored to an individual player, in my opinion. A spread that you're comfortable with can go a long ways.
I'm really happy you brought up that subject because it's something that I think a lot of people need to realize is that, like you had mentioned with your Salamence, you had played so much with it where you didn't even need to do damage calc so much with it anymore when you were practicing. And, just because of that level of comfortability, it means that you're spending less time thinking about what your move is going to be when you're actually in the game. You're thinking like, all right, I know exactly how much my Salamence's Hyper Voice is going to do to this Groudon or whatever the target may be. And so because of that comfortability, you don't have to have any more guessing games. Since you're so comfortable with how you're going to take hits and deal damage, that's like one of the big pros of practicing a lot with the team is just being comfortable with how much damage everything's going to do. I see like a lot of people who talk about, I made this team the day before the event, or I made this wall in line, and I'm like, well, then as long as you're using, I guess if you're using EV spreads that you're familiar with, then I guess it still works out because you're at least comfortable with those damage calcs. And so I think that's like a big part of it is if you're going to borrow an EV spread, borrow one that you've played with a lot so that in the middle of the match, you're not, guessing how much damage it's going to be doing.
Definitely agree with that. I think maybe another historical example that I can provide in regards to EV spreads was something that you brought up earlier in speed. Speed is by far the most important thing to EV in VGC for like a billion reasons, but like the biggest 3 are one, if you are attacking before your opponent, that means you have more opportunities to get hacks and you have less opportunities to get hacked. I don't remember who said it, but you have a 0% chance to flinch from Rock Slide if you move from before your opponent. Something like that. So,
no, it's important to know.
It's
it
true.
Really stresses the importance of speed tiers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in addition to that, speed control is especially important. So, like, right now, I'd say in 17, we have, like, Tailwind from Drifblim and Mandibuzz, and we have Trick Room from Porygon 2, and, like, a couple other little setters. But, like, as far as other speed control, we have, Icy Wind from Ninetales, Bulldoze from Random Mons. Like, what else do we have?
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary of it, because you don't see a whole lot of like Thunder Wave anymore, and with the nerf of it, it also changes the way things work, where it almost just kind of works similarly to Tailwind with a double or a half in speed, depending on your reference point. So, not a whole lot of speed control, but it's important to know. I guess one that we didn't mention yet, and it's a technical form of speed control, is the Choice Scarf.
Yeah, that's definitely a form of speed control. That I would classify under the what I would call inherent speed. Not necessarily inherent speed because it is an item, but I think inherent speed is one of the more important things to think about in this format. And that's because each Pokemon's speed tier is relatively well defined. as far as I'm aware, like you're usually running anywhere from you have a standard set, and then you have like the you have the standard set, then you have what you could expect your opponent to have, and then you'd have like whoa, that's like way out there. I think one example of this is maybe Garchomp. So Garchomp, I would say, tends to run Jolly with max speed. But other Garchomp, I would not be surprised to see Adamant with just like enough speed to outspeed, say, Modest Tapu Lele. I think that's very reasonable. And then you have Garchomp like Shomas that had 36 EVs with the Adamant nature, which were extremely slow. So what he did there was he utilized his speed control with his Drifloom's Tailwind in order to free up EVs for offense and for bulk on his Garchomp, and that certainly came into play. Like, his Garchomp lived a bunch of moves that it probably shouldn't live.
He did the same exact thing with his Tapu Lele too.
Yeah, exactly. He did a similar thing with a lot of his I can't remember, did he run max HP on his Kangaskhan in 2015 on his Worlds winning team?
I'm not familiar with the AV spreads on that one. Yeah,
I believe he ran a bulky Kangaskhan, but someone in the comments section can fact check me on that. I know he ran a lot of 252 spreads there. So you can he did. It was funny too because they just like happened to work out that way with the goals he wanted. I think that's another interesting thing to point out. The goals that Shoma had, which was I believe he used 4 speed 252, which outsped Landorus by either a point or a couple points, and then he had the rest max HP, max defense, and like it did a very specific thing, and it looked like so basic, but it was really well thought out. In a similar vein, I know that Seijin in 2014 on his Pachirisu ran max HP, max defense, and he did that so he could increase the chances of surviving his Gyarados' I believe +1 Earthquake. It might have just been regular. I think it was that. So like these EV spreads that may look like they're really, really basic on paper can actually have a lot of complex functions. But going back to speed, I think, again, speed is incredibly important. And one of the useful resources that Trainer Tower has is the speed tiers. The speed tiers are incredibly important. You can see what a Pokemon's speed is at certain speed intervals. For example, if I look at the speed tiers, I can see that a Garchomp that has a boosting nature and is trained with 252 EVs in speed will always hit a 169 stat. I'm right on that, right? Because I'm not actually looking at the speed.
Yes, that is right.
I'm pretty sure it's 169. So I know that if I want to EV a Pokemon to be faster than that Garchomp, I need to be at least a 170 speed stat. However, I don't care about if I'm 171 or not. The 170 is good enough. I think there are other relevant threats around that speed tier. I'm not really sure what you'd want to cut back for. But I know like a lot of players... Yeah, Nihilego, Kartana, and Ninetales are up there. I know a lot of players run 179 speed on some of their... I don't want to say bulky fast Pokemon, but I know like I think Ray's Specs Tapu Koko hit 179 speed. And that's because it just outspeeds the Gengar and the base 109s and everything below it. And by cutting back enough EVs to just outspeed those certain threats, he was able to free up EVs for other stats. Another thing about EVs, being able to mix them around in speed is being able to avoid speed ties. I think this is really, really important.
The famous term speed creeping?
Yeah, exactly. So in a really good example of this is... well, I guess Arcanine's not a very good example. The traditional example I like to use is 2014 Rotom Wash, where it started off with like 4 speed EVs, and like at the end of the season we had people running like 84 speed EVs. Like a huge jump. Like, do you know anyone who was running that fast?
I think another good one is pretty much through all of its years in Gen 6 is Aegislash. You know, we saw people do all kinds of things with that, but like with the substitute one, it was optimal to just keep subbing in front of them until they chickened out and King Shielded. And so being the faster Aegislash, you would win that war of chicken. And I think that was a really fun one. There are definitely a lot of examples throughout Pokemon, whether it's more optimal to be fast or slow, and speed creeping in either direction. But speed creeping is a really cool topic in general. Just, you know, can you forfeit a little bit, forfeit away EVs in offense or bulk to just put a little bit more in speed so that you can outspeed the opponent's Pokemon? And it's a really fun topic.
It certainly is. One example of this that I used on my 2016 Nationals team, I don't mean to keep bringing my 2016 season up, but I do think this is probably a good way to look at historical examples of EV spread, since 2017 is still relatively underdeveloped. We're only halfway through the season. So my Groudon, if you look at the nature on Pokemon.com, you'll see it has Brave. So my team had a Bronzong on it, so you just assume perhaps that Leonard ran a Groudon with min speed 0 IVs. However, that would not be true. In fact, my Groudon was EV to underspeed the Kyogre that outsped Salamence and Tailwind by 1 point. What that meant was I could more reliably attack with my Groudon against ceiling floor teams with Kyogre, dual primal Kyogre with Salamence being a good example of that. And also, by knowing my Groudon's speed tier, that meant I knew whether or not I wanted to attack the opposing Groudon in or out of Trick Room. It also meant I avoided speed ties, which is always really nice. Sometimes you can look at a situation and say, yeah, well, I wish I had minimum speed here, so I would have had that chance to get that tie. However, I look at it in the opposite way. I can say, well, now I have this opportunity to undo my own Trick Room, or do some adjustment in best of 3 play. This is especially notable in best of 3 play, where I can know, hey, if I'm going to be attacking their Groudon with my Groudon, I know what order this is going to happen in. And that could be very significant when the opponent might just assume just like, oh, okay, I'm always going to be locked into this certain position. I don't have any flexibility. One of the things that EV spreads can do is create that flexibility in manipulating the stats points you have so you can make safer plays or make plays more confident in. For example, my Groudon was also EV trained in order to survive a timid Groudon's Earth Power. It actually had a little more bulk than that for Xerneas reasons, but that was one of its main benchmarks. So one of the things I could very confidently do was Precipice Blades in front of any opposing Groudon, because I could take any one attack. Sometimes you could see that pay off directly in practice, where an opponent Earth Powers me, and then I Precipice Blades them back in the one-on-one situation. That's always really fun. I see. Yeah, that's really fun. But in practice, in tournament play, it tended to be more along the lines of, oh wow, I know I can do this, so my play becomes so much safer now that I know this fact with certainty. EV spreads help a lot in that certainty. They allow you to play safe. By safe, I don't necessarily mean defensively. You can make a safe offensive play. For example, you can very commonly EV a set of Pokemon's combination attacks to KO some certain target. That's a very common thing to do. So I think it's very relevant to consider EV optimization, not only for the defensive spectrum, but for also considering how it can affect your plays in the middle of a match.
So something I wanted to ask you about, and it can be a bit confusing. Like you mentioned, you had this Groudon that had a brave nature, which, subtracts speed, but you weren't running the slowest possible Groudon. Sometimes that's the most efficient way to do things, is you want to use a nature that boosts, typically your biggest stat. I know that is typically the best way to go, unless you really are hitting a benchmark, because that way, with the nature's multiplier, that 1.1 or a plus an extra 10% is getting the most for you, I guess, for your, not money, but for your EVs, I guess, or stats. You're getting the most stat points possible. And so that's why it's important with like a Pokemon like Groudon to run a increasing attack nature, because its attack stat was so high. And if you ran a increasing attack nature, you got so many more stats for it. Whereas we saw at Worlds, someone did make it into the top cut with a serious Groudon. And a lot of people were like kind of looking at that a little bit strangely, like, why would you run a neutral nature that doesn't increase or decrease anything? And it turns out that you could make essentially that same EV spread, I believe, with I think it was a brave nature or something like that. And
yeah, it was one of those natures.
Exactly. And you could still get more points than that. I think it's also important when you are creating EV spreads. I found this myself. I learned it either from someone like you or maybe from like Randy Qua when I was reading like an article, when you're like done, maybe you're investing some bulk into one defensive stat and you're also investing into another defensive stat to survive two different goals on each side of the spectrum. However, you should kind of like look at the number that you end up at it. Let's say you had a defense stat of 140 and then your special defense stat was like 130. Sometimes you can switch it around the natures and then switch around the EVs, and you end up getting a point or two more. Yep. And I don't know exactly what that concept would be called, but it's something to keep in mind, I guess.
Yep, it's very similar to the nature optimization technique. In general, you want to boost your highest stat, and that you can think of that more generally as your base stat, like the actual base stat, but you can also look at it specifically as in the actual stat of your Pokemon after you encountered your goals that you're searching for.
Okay. It's also funny how Pokemon likes to refer to EVs as base stats, but we refer to them as effort values, and we have our own fan-made term for base stats, which is like Garchomp's 102 speed is its speed-based stat. However, it can be a bit confusing when you're like, interacting with something written by Pokemon or something in the game when they refer to like, oh, this is how you can raise your Pokemon's base stats. And from a fan perspective, it can be really confusing.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that you brought up, though, which is investing on different sides of the spectrum. I think that's something that can be rather challenging to do when you're first learning how to create EV spreads. For example, let's say you have a Garchomp and you are content with running an Adamant nature on it. Say you're on a Lele Bloom team because you have Tailwind. Let's say, however, that you still want enough speed to outspeed opposing Tapu Lele to help in the mirror. And let's say you want enough bulk in order to be able to survive opposing Garchomp, Jolly, Tectonic Rage. Let's say you also want enough bulk to be able to survive a Porygon 2 who got a download attack boost instead of a download special attack boost. One popular way to create such an EV spread is to just start investing in an HP first, because HP will help Garchomp survive attacks on both sides of the spectrum. So if you invest in HP all the way, up to that point where you can survive both attacks, you'll end up with 108 HP EVs. That's not too many. You're still taking out quite a bit from speed and attack, in my opinion, but it's not terribly unreasonable. However, you could actually survive it with a combination of investing in both defenses and in HP. A spread of 52 HP, 4 defense, and I believe it's 36 special defense. I run this Garchomp spread, so I should know that off the top of my head. But that combination of EVs will also survive the Jolly Tectonic Rage and Ice Beam while using less EVs. This is especially important because you want as many EVs for attack and speed. Let's say we have another example. Say you wanted your Snorlax, say it's a Curse Lax, and you want to be able to survive a Tapu Lele's Z-Psychic. And you also want Psychic to generally do around under half, so you can more reliably, say, recycle versus it. If you try investing in HP first on Snorlax, you're not going to get anywhere fast. In fact, if you invest fully in HP, you're actually not going to be able to survive the Tapu Lele's Z-Psychic 100% of the time. I believe it's 7/8. I did my calculations before the podcast, so you'll have to forgive me if my numbers are off. But yeah, however, if you switch to a spread that invests more heavily in special defense, in particular 4 HP and 148 special defense, you actually live that Z-Psychic 100% of the time. That's only 152 EVs.
For a great deal less EVs.
That's 100 less EVs, which is a significant. This is significant for a couple of reasons. One, because it would let you invest more in attack. However, let's just say that we wanted to just invest all of our 252 EVs in Snorlax, because why not? If we just did our 4 HP, 148 special defense, then we're left with still a bunch of leftover EVs. So how can we find the best EV spread? Well, we've got Survival Calc for that. There we go. That'll be a nice segue into that. So Survival Calc is honestly completely broken when creating EV spreads. Like if you want like if you want like the rankings for like creating spreads, like Survival Calc is like the Groudon of creating EV spreads. It's like the Garchomp. It's like the Arcanine. It's like the Zygarde if you play Doubles OU.
Oh man, Zygarde. The new form, right?
Yeah, well, the new form actually got quick banned really early on.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, but 1,000 Arrows, you can't switch it on 1,000 Arrows, so it's really broken. Anyway, Survival Calc, what that allows you to do is you just plug in the information that you have with your goals. For example, say I wanted my Snorlax to live that Z Psychic, and then I had 256 available EVs because I had 256 EVs left over after investing my 252 attack EVs. I just plug all that information in the Survival Calc and it gives me a spread. And it takes less than 30 seconds to type things in. It's honestly like the best thing ever because it used to be that I created all of my complex spreads by hand. So like I had an old article on Nugget Bridge called Achieving Perfection, with like the EVB capitalized for that pun.
Yeah, I remember reading that one back then.
And so I went over like some intricacies about creating a complex spread by hand. This was also when, I think this was before Nugget Bridge acquired the damage calculator. So that was really fun because we used the Pokemon Showdowns, which back then was not very good.
Yes, yeah.
So the fact that we were just able now to find like efficient spreads with just a couple clicks of a button is like really amazing.
Survival Calc is a really cool tool. I remember using it back in 2015, like for my first time, and then I've used it in formats since then. It's a really awesome tool to, like you said, do all the work for you. And sometimes I'm sitting there in the damage calc creating, like the regular damage calc, creating an EV spread, and I remember like, oh, I don't even have to do all this work. Like I can go to Survival Calc. It'll tell me the most efficient way to do it. And it's that easy. It's really quick, and it's a very intuitive site. I have you have to try it out for this format because it did come out somewhat recently, I believe. How long ago did it come out?
I believe we launched it 2 weeks ago? Question mark.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
back in March. I think it was the last week of March.
Okay. Yeah. And so it's relatively new to the VGC 2017 format, or I guess just the Gen 7 format or Gen 7 battle system. But it's a very useful tool that you should be using for pretty much every format, whether it's VGC or anything else that you play in, because it can find you the best and simplest EV spreads, and it really saves you a lot of time. It's a really cool tool that I think it's not even best to explain it. It's just something you can go try out yourself. You know, if you know what kind of attacks you want to live, Tapu Koko Thunderbolt, Tapu Lele Psychic, Garchomp's Tectonic Rage or something, or an Earthquake. It's all really simple. You just plug it right in there, plug in the Pokemon that you want to survive stuff, and it's just a couple of clicks.
Yeah. Myriad of options as well. You can survive combination attacks. You can survive exit KOs. We're working on implementation of surviving attacks with Super Citrus Berries. There's a bit more math involved, so we have to code up the logic behind it. But there's you can do a shorthand version by doing some fancy things, but it's not efficient at the moment. It'll just give you like rough estimates. But yeah, it's intuitive. Like, you guys should definitely check it out. Yeah, Steven, this is a question that I wanted to ask you. Have you ever heard of X-Ax Calculator? Do you remember from back in the day?
No, that doesn't sound familiar either.
Okay, so X-Ax Calculator was a very similar tool that was used back in, like, I think 2011 or so, maybe even before then. So I wasn't sure if you were familiar with it. I'm barely familiar with it, but I know, like, I think you can probably provide a little bit better examples of like how far EV spreads have come since when you started playing, because back in the day everyone just used 252, right?
That is actually very true. When you look at some of the really older formats, people just went with basically what we started in the beginning of the show talking about. You have either max speed, max attack, or max HP, and maxing out your whatever attack stat you're using. And that was, that was the very common thing to do in some of the earlier formats. And then I am not sure if it ever came up earlier, and I'm sure it did, but the first time, I'd ever really realized, we could make customizable EV spreads was after Ray had won 2011 Worlds and then, shared his team report and how his EVs affected his team and what they did for each of those Pokemon. That was one of the first times I realized that, and then I was able to start making my own custom EV spreads after that season for 2012. But thinking about just effort values themselves throughout VGC's history is that they've gone through a lot of changes from the very simple 252 spreads in the beginning to where we are now, where you have EV optimization, you have this great survival calculator, which I do want to just point out here how, usually before you get something like this, you'd have to have several tabs open with different attacks running on your same EV spread as you tweak it, and I always found that really tedious and annoying, and this just sounds perfect for, your own personal time in terms of being efficient.
Yeah, I remember one time it took me 3 hours to create one spread, and then I remember this was back when Survival Calc was not fully automated, so I didn't know how to use it. So I was really embarrassed to ask Stats. We were really close friends at the time, but I was really embarrassed to ask him. So I did a 3-hour spread, and then later I just plugged it into Survival Calc, and it gave me the same thing, and I felt pretty mad.
You probably had to feel pretty proud for getting it too, at least figuring out what the calculator would have spit out as the most optimal spread as well.
Yeah, I helped with the logic, so yay.
I think that Survival Calc and, just in general, like what we've been talking about, EV optimization and investing on both sides of defenses, because that's mostly what Survival Calc is for, is, as the name suggests, surviving attacks. At least for me, has been like trick room setters. You need a trick room setter to survive these big attacks, because sometimes when people don't have the right tools to get rid of the trick room, or if you have like a mental herb to get past a taunt, they're going to look to just kind of blow through that Pokemon. And so you want to figure out, what are my physical defensive goals? What is going to be taking out like my Oranguru if we're looking at this format, or what is going to be taking out my Oranguru on the special side? And so I think that's really like important to look at, is just like trick room setters, and in general, I guess the bulky Pokemon that you run on the trick room team. I think that's a important part of the survival calc, is making sure it can allow you to do these things to ensure like you get up trick room, or if you are doing the same thing for a non-trick room team like a Tailwind team, you can make sure that like your Drifloon will survive an attack before it gets up, or to get up Tailwind, or get up to a second Tailwind or something like that. So it's really cool that the survival calc allows you to do these things.
Yeah, I think a classic example of what you were talking about with Trick Room setters is Porygon 2 surviving Golduck's Z Hydro Pump plus a Pelipper Scald in Rain. In fact, that was so popular on Porygon 2 that it actually forced out Brine from T-Man at Melbourne.
I loved that tech. That was so cool.
I know. I also thought it was amazing too. Like Porygon 2, there's no way, even if you invest all the way in HP and special defense, can you survive that combination attack. So it was really, really clever by him figuring out how to do that. And I think that going forward, Porygon 2 players need to look into some new EV spreads, because I know people are still running double ducks, and you're not going to be living that anymore.
Yeah, and there's also people probably still running that EV spread.
Yep.
That old one that survives the double ducks, the Scald version, that is.
I remember when I was going over a team for a player in Oregon, we were discussing, he had a Giglith on his team. And so we weren't even worried about rain at all, because you just leave Gigalith, and, well, that gets rid of the rain. So you don't need EVs to survive that. But we were talking about his matchup versus Kartana. It wasn't very good. So one of the things we decided to do with his Porygon 2 was actually EV it, so it could survive a Sacred Sword, one turn of Sand, and another Sacred Sword. And this was especially relevant because it would often be the case where his Porygon 2 would not be in a position to just safely set up Trick Room or whatever. It ended up being some situation where this was a relevant goal. I'm trying to think of what it was exactly. But for the sake of simplicity, we'll just say that it was an actual goal he had. So that was one of the things that we went through with Survival Calc. I'm just like, okay, so we want to survive this attack with Sand. Boom, have 94% HP remaining. Then we want to survive 2 of these Sacred Swords. Boom, give me the spread. And then it gave me the spread. And I'm just like, here you go.
Yeah,
and so it was
really
just
cool
that
it can allow you to do those things.
Yeah.
So we've talked about effort values for quite a while here, and this excellent tool in the survival calculator, which you can check out online. You can Google it. Survival calculator for VGC,
you can find it through Trainer Tower.
Find it through Trainer Tower, which is also another great way to do that. But I feel like I say this all the time, but effort values are always one of those great, hidden ways you can always customize your own Pokemon. And I feel like a lot of teams could potentially have the same 6 Pokemon and be very different, not only in movesets and items, but the EVs can make a big difference. I think one of the biggest examples in the past would be, just Big 6 mirrors from last season. Again, effort values are very important. You should definitely learn how to use these, learn how to create your own EV spreads, because I think it's a very powerful skill and useful skill to have in competitive Pokemon. But do you guys have any closing thoughts on effort values before we move on? Because we need to move on to some of the Pokemon stats from the last few months.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on. We can potentially talk about EV spreads we've seen maybe on some of these new Pokemon.
Okay, so we have stats from TrainerTower.com that really just take into account tournaments from March and February. So February and March, rather. And you can take a look at these stats online as well. Just find them on TrainerTower.com. It should be on the front page at the moment, but otherwise it'll be archived in April. So when you guys take a look at this, you see, top Pokemon by usage, and then you also have cores and, some descriptions of some of the Pokemon and how to deal with them. So I really like how Trainer Tower is doing this for, just the competitive scene in general. And in terms of the usage statistics you've been seeing for, this article and just at this time in the metagame, are you guys surprised at all by anything? Are you kind of expecting, did you kind of expect, Pokemon that rose in usage and decreased in usage? Anything else that stands out to you?
So I think the biggest jump is probably, I think it wasn't officially the biggest jump, but the biggest jump that I noticed is Drifblim, going from non-existent to now being on apparently 10% of teams. That's a huge jump, and I only expect it to rise from there. I think because Lele Drifblim...
Is that a joke?
What? What are you talking about? Lele Drifblim is...
No. The joke is that you only expect it to rise from there.
Oh, that is.
It would have been so much better if you just didn't point it out. I feel like jokes run better that way.
All right, fine.
I'm sorry. Alex is much better at getting puns than I am.
Oh, that's true. That's true. We did have some jokes that we were talking about the other day. But anyway, back to the subject of Drifblim and Lele.
Yeah. Recently winning a regional, I think, solidifies its all. It won an international. But I think that just puts the icing on the cake, really. I think Drifblim should be shooting up in usage pretty soon here. I think teams really need to figure out a way to deal with this thing. I saw one way that I thought was really clever was some players putting Wild Charge on their Tapu Koko to get around the special defense boost that Drifblim gets. I'm pretty sure it doesn't knock out, even with the terrain. I don't think it knocks out with Psychic Terrain, but if you can get in position where it's advantageous, or perhaps a Wild Charge plus a combination attack will knock out the Drifblim. I think that's a really clever way of dealing with Drifblim, and I don't think it's going to be the only way. I think that we're going to have to see something else to stop this rampage of Drifblim that are showing up everywhere.
Yeah, I know. I feel like we've talked about this before on the show, but people just weren't respecting that core enough. And after it winning 3 events, I think people are starting to realize, and now seeing the usage stats, Drifblim at about 10% is just the wake-up call for people. Like, okay, this is actually a really strong duo and a really strong core if you end up including the other common Pokemon like Garchomp or whoever else you end up seeing on that team. And it's just, it's something that people are going to have to start realizing they have to prepare for when they're building a team. A lot of people think of individual Pokemon like, I need to stop Garchomp, Tapu Koko, Arcanine because they're all like the very common Pokemon. However, this duo in Tapu Lele and Drifblim can be really devastating. So, especially like that version that Aaron ran at regionals where he had the taunt on Tapu Lele to prevent Trick Room, because that was kind of people's go-to reaction was, well, if they're going to set up Tailwind, obviously Trick Room deals really well with Tailwind, flip the speed tiers on them. However, if you are using the most common Trick Room setter, Porygon 2, it's going to be harder because Porygon 2 usually can't get past a taunt. And so people are going to have to get more creative with their answers to this. It's just, it covers a lot of options. Obviously, Drifblim typically has Will-O-Wisp to kind of neuter the physical attackers that try to take it down. And then the special attackers are going to have to get its +1 special defense from the Psychic Seed. So it can end up being a really annoying combo. And I think people are still looking for the best way to beat it.
Well, perhaps as a tangent, what's the most interesting fourth move that you guys have seen on Drifblim? I've seen Hypnosis from Seijin, and then we also have, like, I know Sunny Day, because what you can do is you can, like, Sunny Day to meme on Ninetales trying to use Aurora Veil.
And the Ducks.
Yeah, and the Ducks too. That's
because
always
you
fun.
can outspeed Golduck if you invest it correctly. That's something else kind of related to EV spreads. And I did want to mention earlier, like Shoma's EV spread for his Drifblim was really interesting because he was running like timid, basically max speed.
Yeah, he was really fast.
And I don't know if that's always necessary, but it's just something interesting to consider. And he was running really offensively, and so it just really shows you what you can do, like with different goals for Pokemon. You know, investing them in ways that you never thought before. But anyway, we were talking about interesting moves on Drifblim, and I think we've seen. You mentioned Sunny Day, but we've also seen I think Rain Dance do well at some tournament.
That was Shoma's, I believe. I think it was
Shoma's Rain Dance. Okay,
because he had Gyarados on his team.
Exactly, yeah, and it kind of synergizes well with his water types, while also annoying Gigalith with its special defense boost. Ninetales still can't set up the Aurora Veil, and depending on how fast the Drifblim is, maybe his goal was to take down Lilligant Torkoal by setting up the rain before Lilligant could go for an after you plus Eruption.
I'm all for everything that beats Lillicole.
Yes, yeah. I don't think anybody likes facing that, because while I won't discredit the strength of that team, a lot of it comes down to coin toss plays. And I mean, if you're good at coin toss plays and hitting your sleep powders, go for it. All the power to you. But, you know, I like to play a little bit more consistently, I guess.
How about you, Steven? What's your most bizarre Drifblim move?
I mean, I wouldn't really call it bizarre, but you guys have kind of covered already some of those weather-changing ones. You know, played against some of them, didn't really expect the weather to change on me so quickly, so those caught me off guard. And just trying to think if I've played anything else that was weird.
But it's a weather balloon.
I'll give you a second to think, Steven, because it
is a weather balloon, yeah. So I'm just going to go with that.
Weather balloon joke? Okay, well, I wanted to say, because I didn't actually mention a move that was very different from Leonard's answer, but I have seen Drifblims run either stockpile or minimize plus baton pass. And you know, sometimes these Drifblim Lele teams, since it's becoming a more common core and you're seeing the different ways that people are running it, you see them with a Snorlax because like we had mentioned, Trick Room can be a bit of an issue for the team. However, if you have a Drifblim baton pass, a stockpile, or minimize to a Snorlax and Trick Room is now up, you know, you're in for a bad time. And I faced something somewhat similar at this midseason last week, and the team was really interesting as that Drifblim was with Tapu Fini, and it had Swagger, but it also had Minimize, and there was a Psych Up Porygon 2 to Psych Up the Swagger boosts if it went onto something, or if it psyched up the Minimize boosts. And, you know, if a Porygon 2 has evasion boosts, it's going to be really, really hard to get rid of. So
you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, that was a very scary one to face. And yeah, Drifblim, it does have a very deep move pool with lots of interesting moves it can run. And then one of the worst options, I would say, but you know, people did start to run it at the very beginning of its popularity, was like Acrobatics. I think people are starting to realize Shadow Ball really is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
But Acrobatics was something you saw a bit earlier on too.
Yeah, you could use it to hit Pheromosa, but you can burn Pheromosa and Tailwind in front of it, so it's not as necessary.
And then once your partners are outspeeding Pheromosa, you really took away its biggest advantage.
Yeah, I think people with Acrobatics in the beginning were probably just lured by that great trait of losing your item right away, so that was probably the trap they fell into early on.
You know, also, I saw on Twitter, Wolf was streaming with Thief Drifblim, and it took him a while to realize that once you thief an item, you lose the Unburden boost.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
So, that's another silly move to consider because, you know, it's kind of counterintuitive, but it can be very nice if you end up stealing some of those super citrus berries, so I guess it does have a bit of merit.
So guys, do you want to really quickly just mention, like, Arcanine's really high usage?
Yeah, Arcanine, I think is, I think it's maybe a bit too high. I think it's really, really good because of how versatile it is, and it's because it's the only viable fire type. But I still think 72% is a bit too high. I wouldn't be surprised to see players perhaps adapt a little bit more and just like clamp down on the Arcanine matchup. I mean, it's not easy to do, and Arcanine is so flexible that it fits on just about every team. But yeah, I think Arcanine's popularity might be a little overblown, but it's still definitely a good mon.
Yeah, it's crazy to see such high numbers from that, and it makes me reminiscent of Groudon from last season, just as this dominant fire type. However, it does also fit characteristics from other top Pokemon, like Landorus. Having the Intimidate ability is just so valuable in VGC, getting a -1 attack on both your opponent's Pokemon. So I think it's justified to see Arcanine as the number 1 spot, and I was surprised when I saw in BattleSpot, I think Garchomp had overtaken it at some point, but during the Season 2 stats, that is. But I think Arcanine definitely deserves the number 1 spot, but 72%, a bit high. I don't know. It's a very good Pokemon. I'm a very big fan of using it, and like you said, it just fits so well into any team. And I guess like my personal anecdote on Arcanine is I think it's up there because without it, Kartana just kind of would run wild in this metagame.
Yeah.
And, when you look at Kartana, you kind of need an Arcanine on your team because otherwise Kartana is just going to beat so many things. If you look at the top Pokemon, Kartana does very well against a lot of them. It hits all of the Tapus for super effective, as well as gives Trick Room setters a hard time with its strong Sacred Sword and occasionally an all-out pummeling. It's got a lot of flexibility with the different items it can run, so Kartana being such a dominant Pokemon, and I think it would be a lot higher if it wasn't for Arcanine's incredibly high usage. So I think that's the main justification for having an Arcanine on almost any team, is that Kartana is a threat worth packing an Arcanine for.
Right, you need it for Kartana. Arcanine is also a flexible Pokemon, and I think just speaking defensively as a fire type, you need it for those important resistances, especially for Fairy when you get the introduction of the Fairy Guardians. So that's something you're going to want to have apart from having a Steel type. So defensively, you need to have something like that. Intimidate's always an extremely valuable ability. Probably, arguably probably the best ability in the game. Can you guys think of a better one?
Parental Bond.
I mean, yeah, Wonder Guard, okay. I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know, as far as
VGC, yeah.
Yeah, applicability, probably Intimidate is by far the best.
It's always been, just such a threat in VGC, and it's always been, super relevant in every format.
Oh, maybe Levitate. Levitate's also really good because it stops the grab spam. But I think Intimidate.
Yeah, I would give that a second or third.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Arcanine, when you give it Intimidate, you have really good stats across the board, and you're a fire type, which helps tremendously, especially in this format with again regional decks, and the stuff they've introduced the past few years for competitive Pokemon. Arcanine's up there. I think the usage is, it's right where it should be. I don't think it could be lower. People could have better answers to it, but it's gonna be hard to work around on all the various types of teams you can see it on. But again, with the usage stats on Trainer Tower, you guys can check out this article. Really good things to read these updates as we go through the season. They show you how the metagame's been changing. If any, specific Pokemon have been jumping up in usage, like we just talked about Drifblim, and it's really interesting to see how the metagame has been changing slowly through time and over time. But lastly, we have questions, and this is one from last time that we forgot to do because we were running long, and hopefully we'll get to cover it this time. And we're going to speak really generally here, but this is from Liquid Monk, who asks, have you guys thought of tackling more controversial topics with guests on the show? So, Alex, I believe we have thought about it, and Leonard, I think, it wouldn't be unfair to say that we would not cover controversial topics. It's just, obviously, these are touchy subjects, and we don't necessarily want to put people or, ourselves in bad places either.
Yeah, we don't really want to upset anyone, and obviously we're okay with talking about subjects that have different sides to them, where you're going to have an opinion. Steven says Conkeldurr wrong, but I think it's important to be able to talk about them. You just got to be very careful when you're talking about controversial subjects. we're going to ignore certain subjects just because, you know, there's like topics in VGC that we don't think are healthy for discussion, whether they've been, you know, discussed enough on Twitter where basically everybody just rants at each other back and forth and has their strong opinions, or it's a controversial subject that we think could offend people if either of us were to take a side on it. So I think that there are controversial subjects that Steven and I are perfectly fine with covering, but it comes down to our like level of comfortability with the subject. Do we think that it's a discussion that is harmless and it's more, you know, about core VGC, or if it's something that, you know, is beyond it that could be offensive to people, we'll probably end up avoiding it. But I wanted to ask you, Leonard, you know, since you are the guest here, and this is more like a question directed at Steven and I, what is your opinion, since I know you've listened to the show at least a couple of times, what would be your opinion on hearing on the show controversial subjects? Do you want to hear more of them? Are there things that we are ignoring? Or do you think that the approach that I mentioned is like an okay way to go about it? Or is there any advice you could give us?
I think the way that you guys are approaching it, which is avoiding certain topics, is pretty good. One thing that I really like, that I particularly enjoy, is listening to debates, like actual formal debates. So I think if you're going to have a discussion like that, setting it up with like planning out what you are going to be saying, like having well-defined ideas, like letting one person speak for a certain amount of time, and then letting the other person speak for another certain amount of time. It's very dangerous, and there are many sketchy areas that you can delve into. I also think that's sometimes dangerous to perhaps have guests talk about it as well, because I could say whatever I want, and that could reflect badly on you guys, and I certainly don't want to do that if I can help it.
And secondly, I wanted to ask your opinion on the fighting type that holds the concrete pillars.
So sometimes I pronounce it Conkeldurr, but I've more recently adopted Conkeldurr. So
oh no!
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
That's what I'm talking about.
I'm sorry. I used to call it Conkeldurr, but I've adopted Conkeldurr because it sounds. I don't know. It sounds better. I don't care whether or not it's right.
No, you can take Steven's side on it, and I think that might be the one they have in the official Pokedex app if you want to go by that. But I just think, like, I've always looked at it like, oh, that's Conkeldurr. Like, he's just Durr. I'm a fighting type.
Ferrarthorn. Ferrarthorn.
Yeah, that's another one that has a lot of controversy around it. I can't remember what was my second go-to one, but Conkeldurr is always a fun one to talk about, and I've brought it up several times on the show just because I like to mock Steven, and that is our controversial topic for this episode is, you know, how do you pronounce that fighting type with concrete pillars? It's definitely Conkeldurr, but, you know, if you want to say it the wrong way, if you want to, you know, do it that way, go ahead. I don't mind offending those.
Do it Steven's way, right?
Yeah, I don't mind offending you Steven side people because you're saying it wrong anyway.
Exactly.
But, you know, to get back to Liquid Monk's question, yes, we've thought about covering controversial topics. We, you know, most of the time, some of the things I see online are usually not worth it to discuss. But when something important happens that I feel like we need to talk about, like maybe the team sheets thing, or I'm guessing like there was some issue with there's an issue about gender in a certain article, and just to point this out here, gender does not affect the way you play in this game. It does not matter at all. So in terms of that reference, you know.
Oh, sorry. Did you see her first Twitter post? Woman comes out of nowhere to get Twitter. That was the best thing ever.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. At least a fun way to acknowledge that. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any more thoughts on that, Steven? Because we do have one other question to talk about.
I guess not. I mean, we'll definitely consider controversial topics in the future, but you know, we mostly steer away from them because I hate dealing with those. But when something significant happens, you can be sure we'll talk about it. So don't count us out for that.
And if you have topics for us, you know, feel free to suggest them. You know, just comment somewhere or feel free to tweet at us, email us. We would love to hear if you have topics that you want to hear us discuss and talk about. You know, if they are controversial, then like Steven and I had mentioned, we'll consider them. But if it's something, just general Pokemon, we would love to hear from you and answer more questions. And speaking of more questions,
if there's a controversy, we'll dance around it. But you're right, more questions. This comes from @PatFromPalette, and the question is, which non-competitive VGC mons in the 2017 format would you like to use?
I mean, I've got I play the EV team, right? And one of the mons that I hate playing when I use the EV team is Mimikyu. So what you can do is you can use Pangoro, and it gets Mold Breaker, and it also gets Power Trip. So you pass the Pangoro, and you just Oko Mimikyu.
Okay.
It sucks at every other regard, though. But my true favorite Pokemon would be Alolan Golem, because Explosion in Electric Terrain kills Goodra. And who would not want that to happen? So that's my favorite.
If you want to rig a match after this podcast, Leonard, I'll bring my Goodra, and we'll see how this goes. But you got to watch out for my Bulldoze, though, because that's one of the more common moves on Goodra that I've at least seen. So
please no.
However, I guess if I were to pick one, it would be a Pokemon that you wouldn't think of as crazy, because it got a buff this generation, and that's Flygon. However, when I saw that it got the Dragon Dance buff, and I was like, all right, it's legal. This could actually be pretty fun. Flygon could maybe make a name for itself this format, but it really just has not shown. It doesn't have Tailwind to speed control for the team, and it's definitely outshone by Garchomp with its higher speed and higher offensive stats. So Flygon's been one of my favorite Pokemon for a very long time, and I would love to see it, break out a bit more and make a bigger name for itself. It's something that I could definitely make work in this format, but I don't know. I want to spend time focusing on the best Pokemon, and so Garchomp's probably the better bet. But I was talking about this beforehand with Leonard, and you could use Double Dragon with Garchomp and Flygon, and it is an Earthquake partner, which nobody runs in this format anyway. So whatever, maybe running Double Dragon Ground is the way to go.
Yeah, and for mine, I'm gonna go with. So again, this has to do with non-competitive Pokemon that that we consider not very great, and for some reason in the beginning of the season, I was really looking into Toucanon. Mostly because it has it has Skill Link, so it can really abuse. I think it learns Rock Blast maybe, and
yes.
Bullet Seed for sure.
It does. Mm-hmm.
And Beak Blast was always just for some reason it stuck out to me, and I really wanted to see would I be able to make this work. Never got to try it because when you see a bad Pokemon, most of the time you just theory around it a little bit and then just decide, no, this isn't good. I'm gonna move on. But yeah, I think I feel like it had some really weird, interesting options, and I guess the better skilling Pokemon would go to Cloyster for the format. But you always had an interest in using Toucanon, mainly because of Skill Link, and Beak Blast is really intriguing. I think you have to use a turn to sit there, and if you get hit, they get burned or something.
I believe that's how it works.
Yeah, you wait until the end of the turn, and then you attack. I don't think you can flinch like Focus Punch, and it's not like a 2-turn attack like Sky Attack. It's just you charge up and hit at the end of the turn. If they manage to make physical contact, you get burned. Or special contact if you're using Grass Knot. Yeah,
and I guess I think other than that, maybe it's slightly more viable, but maybe not as viable. Like Slow King or Slowbro and Trevenant, I want to try out, but I haven't yet. I think they have potential.
I'd like to see if I could find a use for Bone Sweet. It's got really low stats, unfortunately. Back in 2015, I was messing around with a team of 5 standard Pokemon in Oddish. But I would actually bring... You remember it?
Yeah, I remember. I used a similar thing with Big B in 2016, but my B was Combee.
Combee, yeah, exactly. But did you bring the Combee to matches?
Yeah, I beat Ezreal with it using his Worlds team.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I would use the Oddish, and since unfortunately Oddish is not legal this format, I was considering Bone Sweet, but actually Oddish had alright stats within a Violate. However, Bone Sweet's got some pretty poor stats, and I remember when my girlfriend Gina was playing through the game using a Bone Sweet, leveling it up was just a super pain, and so I can't imagine it'd be any better in competitive if it can barely survive the in-game. So, unfortunate for Bone Sweet, since it is very cute. But, look forward to that maybe in the future once I actually get like a Worlds invite. If I can make it there, then I'll start messing around with Bone Suite.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, definitely no time to mess around now. But I think that'll do it for the show. So you guys can find our show on iTunes. You can leave us a review. You can download the show from there. You can also send us an email. The email is vgchypervoice@gmail.com. Send us feedback. Send us your questions. We'd be happy to answer them. Send us your controversy, and we'll also be happy to discuss that, depending on the level of it. But lastly, we're all on Twitter. You can follow all of us. And Leonard, first off, where can people follow you?
You can find me at the Wobblefett. It's like DAW, and then just go from there and hope you get it right.
Or just find him in the VGC room. It's spelled the same way as that, and his name's up towards the top, so find the Wobblefett there, and you could probably find his name on Trainer Tower somewhere if you look for the articles that we mentioned, like Survival Calc and stuff like that.
Or NPA replays. Yay! NPA.
Yeah, there we go.
That's right. And Alex, where can people follow you?
People can find me at Lexicon VGC.
And I am at Super Morioka. Thank you so much for listening to the show, and we really hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you to Leonard for being on the show. We really appreciate you being on here and spending some time with us.
Thank you for hosting.
And, again, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys next time for more. Stay tuned.
Alola.
Alola.